Hello, government students. Today we're going to be doing Notes 5.2, the electoral process. So your essential question, how do representatives get elected in the United States? So in the United States, our election usually occurs in two steps. First, we have the nomination process, which narrows the field of candidates from quite a few down to just one candidate for each party. And then we have the general election, where people choose between the representatives in each of the political parties to make their final choice for who should hold the office. So this usually narrows the field down. In 2020, we had over 20 different Democrats, and we got whittled down to just one, Joe Biden, through that process of nominating a candidate. So there's three ways to nominate. You can self-announce, so you can say that you want to run for office and you announce your candidacy. We have the caucus, which is originally how we had the nomination process go. It was a private meeting of politicians, and they would choose one person to represent the political party. And then we have the convention. The convention is considered to be more democratic because we have delegates that are selected to represent people's wishes, and then they choose who the candidate is going to be. So there's different kinds of primaries depending on what state you live in. In California, we have an open primary. So in California, our primary elections, they happen this past year, they happened in March. So we moved up the date. Normally they happen later on in the year, around June, but in 2020, we moved that date up until March so that we could be more competitive. And your primary election has to do with which political party you are. So you get a ballot based on your political party. If you did not sign up for a political party, if you didn't choose one of the political parties to vote for, then you can get a ballot depending on which political parties are open. So, for instance, if you were nonpartisan, if you did not choose a political party and you wanted to vote in the primary election for president, in California, you're able to choose a Democratic ballot and you can vote for the Democratic candidates. The Republicans have a closed primary, though, so you are not allowed to choose one of their ballots and vote for the Republican candidates. So it all depends on which party and which state you're living on, how the primaries work. So, primary elections are the way to nominate a candidate for office. So, the primary election that we had in 2020, we had a lot of different candidates running to become president. They were running for either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. They also had them for smaller parties as well, the third party candidates. This is supposed to bring about more democracy because it gives you more choice in who you want your candidates to be. The nominee that has the most delegates becomes the candidate for their party, and the candidacy is made official at the party's convention in the late summer months. So these are the different types of primaries we have across the nation. As I said, different states do primaries a little bit differently. Some are open to everyone, some are closed based on political party. So every state does it a little bit differently. And then they take place over the course of a year. So they're not just happening all on one day like the presidential elections happen. They actually happen over a period of time. So, for instance, here on this map, this is the 2020 primary calendar. So, these are the different days that we had our primary elections. As you can see, California there had our primary election in March, but some started as early as February and some went as late as into June for their primary elections. In order to get on the ballot or to get a proposition on the ballot, things must gather a required number of signatures from voters. So you may have seen people collecting signatures at school, or you may have seen people collecting signatures like outside of Target or outside of Walmart. They're like, hey, do you want to change this law or something like that? And they're collecting signatures to get things on the ballot. Right now in the state of California, we have some voters trying to get a recall of Gavin Newsom, our governor, Governor Newsom. They are trying to recall him so that he is no longer our governor. So people are collecting signatures for that. So that's called a petition when you're collecting signatures to get things on the ballot. Elections are regulated by state law, but there are some federal regulations as well. Congress has decided when elections are going to be. So, elections for our president and for Congress are always going to be the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November on even numbered years. Okay, so for our example, the last one that we just had, November 2020, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November was November 3rd, and it was an even numbered year 2020, so that's when we had our congressional election. A precinct is a voting district, so it's the area that you live in that you will vote in. And polling places are the actual physical buildings where you go to vote. Now, these are different depending on where you live. Mine happens to be a fire station. Sometimes they're at libraries, and sometimes they're in gyms, sometimes they're at schools. The closest one to us here at River City is actually right outside our campus gates. So, right there at the gym, right next to school, they will have a polling place on election day every year. We will be able to, anyone who lives right next to the high school will be able to go vote there. And if you don't want to vote in person, if you want to vote by mail, you can drop your ballot off in the mailbox, but you can also drop it off at any polling place. So you can drop it off there as well. Initially, we had voting done orally, so people thought it was quote unquote manly or masculine to speak out your vote and vote in person. But we started using paper ballots in the mid 1800s. And since then, we have had paper ballots, which are private. You vote independently, no one knows who you vote for, it's all private information. The ballots will look something like this on the left for the state of California. Different states do it a little bit differently. Some do it by party, and then some do it by office. In California, we do it by office. So, whenever, if you have a presidential election you're going to vote for, the first thing that'll be on there will be the president and vice president, and you'll get to choose between all the candidates running for president. And then it will go down Senate, House of Representatives, local elections, all of those things. It'll be by office. We have been using electronic vote counting machines since the 60s. So when we vote in California, we get a kind of a long sheet of paper, and that's what you vote on. It's a little bit thicker, it's like cardstock, and you fill it in, like you fill in the little bubbles for who you want to vote for. So you take that, you fill in your bubbles, and then you go and you put it in a machine that looks just like this. This doesn't actually count who you're voting for, but it just counts the ballot. And then they take those all to the county elections office, which is in Woodland. And there in Woodland, they will hand count all of the votes, and they will determine who people voted for. Right, so money and elections. Campaign spending has gone up tremendously. We spend millions and millions and millions of dollars every time we have an election. People either pay for elections themselves. In 2016, we had the Clinton administration versus the Trump administration, both running against each other. And Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were very wealthy people, so they both were able to put up a lot of their own money for those elections. But then they also get contributions from small contributions, like from individuals. A lot of wealthy people can donate and support to campaigns. They can fundraise. They can get money from political action committees known as PACs. The Federal Election Committee was created in 1974 to administer all federal laws dealing with campaign financing. So they believe that it's their job to regulate campaign financing and make sure that any money that's raised for a campaign is actually spent on a campaign. President Trump and his campaign in 2016 got in a little bit of money or a little bit of trouble for how they spent their money, because they had money that was fundraised for their campaign and they used it on a legal dispute with a woman named Stormy Daniels. She was suing the president, and so they paid her and the legal fees using campaign money, and they're not allowed to do that. So they were in a little bit in trouble for that one. All right, so the FEC ensures that there is disclosure of campaign finance information. They have to say who is raising their money, where they're getting their money from. They limit their campaign contributions. You are limited. You can only give, I think the limit's like $2,000, how much you can give to each campaign. They have limits on what they can spend the money on, so limits on campaign expenditures. And we've had some Supreme Court cases over this before. So, Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976, we had the First Amendment being challenged because they said that in politics, money is speech. So, if we're limiting the amount of money that we can spend on a campaign, we are limiting our freedom of expression. So although there's limits on how much money you can actually donate to a campaign, there's a lot of loopholes in all of this. There's what we call soft money, which is money that's given to the party or given to different organizations that will support a candidate rather than giving that money to a candidate independently. There's independent spending, where people who are not the candidate can spend as much money as they want. Um, they can spend money attacking other candidates that are running against them, things like that. They can use issue ads, so advertisements on TV, on social media, on YouTube, to criticize a candidate or support a candidate without actually mentioning their name. A big Supreme Court case regarding this was in 2010. It's called Citizens United. It was a Citizens United case. And this was a Supreme Court case that said corporate funding for campaigns cannot be limited. So, although we as individual citizens, they can limit how much money that we give, they said corporations cannot be limited. Corporations are not people, so they can give as much money as they want. It was considered a very controversial ruling in 2010. President Obama was very against this. He said the Supreme Court reversed a century of law to open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections. I don't think American elections should be bankrolled by America's most powerful interests or by foreign entities. All right, the mass media. So, public opinion is the attitudes that are held by people on matters of the government and politics. Public affairs are the events and issues that concern the public at large. So, our public opinion is swayed by the media that we are consuming. As we learned yesterday in our quiz about our political ideology, we learned a little bit more about the political spectrum. So, some people fall all the way on the left on the political spectrum. They're really radical. Some people are more in the center, they're moderate, and some people are more conservative or reactionary. And remember, these things are all influenced by your family, by your upbringing, where you fall on the political spectrum. Your family is the first people that raise you. They're the ones that teach you right from wrong. So generally, our family has a huge influence, and schools also have a huge influence on our political knowledge because you're being educated about politics here in schools, and you're actually being educated about politics since the very beginning, since you're in kindergarten. So not only in your 12th grade year, you taught about the government and how political systems work, but you're taught about patriotism from when you're in kindergarten. You're taught about who we consider to be great Americans, our founding fathers. You're taught about the national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. You have to say that every day. So all of those things are taught to you from a very young age about patriotism in the United States. The mass media can include any means of communication that can reach a large dispersed audience. So the mass media isn't just your typical news stations that you might think of, your CNNs, your Fox News, but it's also social media. Social media, your Snapchat, your Instagram, your TikTok, all of those things have a massive amount of communication that you can easily spread information to the world, to a large audience. So that's considered part of the mass media. Your peer groups can also influence your public opinion. So, any peers that you have that might be politically active or might have an opinion about a candidate, that can influence you. And then, of course, historical events can have a major impact on public opinion. So, when I was young, a big historical event that affected people of my generation was 9/11. That had a huge impact on our nation. For your generation, things like gun reform, the school shootings that have happened might have had a huge influence on you. Um, the Black Lives Matter movement. that's been gaining steam over the course of the last year. Of course, it's been going on since 2014, but the events that happened with George Floyd and the uprising, the racial uprising that we had over the course of the summer of 2020, that might be having a huge impact on you and your generation. So it could sway your opinion as well. All right, so measuring public opinion. We have elections that measure public opinion. So candidates who win an election are said to have the command of the electorate. So they won the electorate. They're supposed to carry out their campaign promises. So often that's a way to measure public opinion. Interest groups work to shape public policy. We're going to learn little bit more about interest groups tomorrow, but an example of interest groups would be like a union. So, for an example, California Teachers Association is a teachers union here in California. They're an interest group. So they work to shape public policy. The media is described as a mirror and a molder of public opinion. And then personal contacts. So public officials rely on their constituents. They read their mail, they answer phone calls from their constituents, from the people they represent, and they are supposed to respond to their opinion as well. We also use polls to measure public opinion. So we can ask the same people the same questions over and over and over again, a large group of people, the same questions. This is called a straw vote. Sometimes this is unreliable. The 2016 election taught us how often polls are unreliable. The 2016 election, all the polls were saying Hillary Clinton's going to win, Hillary Clinton's going to win. And then, of course, we know Donald Trump won. Even though Hillary Clinton did end up winning about 3 million more votes than Donald Trump did, she still ended up losing the election. So polls aren't always super accurate. Overall, we do believe that polls are fairly reliable, but again, like 2016, doesn't always work out that way. Polls and pollsters are sometimes said to shape public opinion based on the questions that they're asking. And public opinion is the major, but by no means the only influence on public policy. The American political system is designed to protect minority interest against the majority views. So we got to make sure that we're still protecting minority rights. All right, and then the mass media here. A medium is a means for communication. So a medium transmits information. So we have all kinds of different ways to transmit information now. We still have people who get information, who get their news from TV, from the radio, from newspapers, from magazines. A lot of people get their information from social media now as well. The media can shape the public agenda, so it can highlight problems that need government attention. They can tell the people what to think about. They don't necessarily tell people what to think, but they can tell them what they should be thinking about. So, for instance, if the events of last summer, if the events that happened with Black Lives Matter and the protests, if those weren't covered as much by the media, they may not have had as big of an impact as they do, as they still are having right now today. Also, television and social media allows candidates to appeal directly to the people. They use their media coverage, they use their Snapchat, their Instagram, their TikToks. They have all the social media as well. And they have to record in very short sound bites now because, as we know, Instagram videos or TikTok videos, Snapchat videos, they're pretty short. So you got to get those quick sound bites, snappy, short segments that they can report back. So they have to get those out. All right, so only a small part of the public actually understands the power of the media on public affairs. In-depth coverage is available. You all are living in the information age. You can seek out any information that you'd like. You can go in depth and you can actually research and get the truth. But a lot of people just read headlines. A lot of people will just consume anything that they see on social media and believe it to be true. This is especially true of older generations using Facebook, but we are hopeful that younger generations like you will take the time to get a little bit more educated and read past the headlines. So that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to write a summary at the end of your notes, a couple sentences on what you learned.